Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Okay, tonight the format is that we're going to go through a fireside chat, and there will be plenty of time for Q&A. And then we're going to feature we're going to have a featured local startup come up, and he's going to present the company, and he's going to present a problem or problems that he's having that they're struggling with right now, and they could use our help and feedback. So it will be an open forum. I call them problem-solving forums, and everybody will have a chance to pitch in and share their thoughts, ideas, and criticism. The only thing I ask is that if you do give criticism, or if you do offer constructive criticism, that you do so in the spirit of helping them, not tear them down. Okay? So that having been said, I want to move into our fireside chat portion, and I want to introduce to you tonight a gentleman that I have followed from afar for quite some time, Mr. Rick Kohr, who is a founding member and CEO of Evergreen Advisors. And let me give you a little bio first. First and foremost, he is a backyard sports enthusiast pro, as I understand it. Always up for competition, including Can-Jam, basketball, or golf, your choice. In his spare time, he is CEO and founding member of Evergreen Advisors, right? Okay. Rick has over 30 years of experience in advising early stage and growth companies through middle market on finance, recapitalizations, mergers, acquisitions, capital raise, securities questions and issues, as well as alternatives to financing. Rick was a co-founder and managing member of the Chesapeake Emerging Opportunities Club, which was an early stage venture capital fund. He currently serves on the board for Life Journey, Past Sensors, Economic Alliance of Greater Baltimore, Howard County Economic Development Authority, and the advisory board for the Healthcare Interactive and Chesapeake Systems. There are a number of others, but in the interest of time, I'll let Rick share those with you. Rick also appears very frequently in the local and regional press as a subject matter expert and as an influencer in the startup entrepreneurial world here tonight. And the format that our fireside chats follow is we bring in highly successful, accomplished founders, startups, entrepreneurs, etc. And we celebrate their successes. But equal, if not more important, we want to learn about the failures. We want to learn about the struggles. We want to learn what they did that they can help us not do in order to help us grow better companies. So, that having been said, I would like to welcome, and please give a warm Columbia Startup Grind welcome to Mr. Rick Kohr, Evergreen Advisors.
I don't know if I'll stand or sit. First of all, thanks for coming and being here tonight. Want to make sure it's impactful for you all. We all have a million things to do, so everybody comes from a little bit different perspective. I've been in the entrepreneurial world going back probably to 85, kind of realized that the entrepreneurial bug was there. I was getting married, bought a row house in Federal Hill, trying to renovate that. I had a number of job offers from Deloitte Touche, to date myself, it was Touche Ross back then, a bank, another firm. I took the startup spin out doing robotics from Black & Decker that had no money. They were 6 months behind in their financials and trying to raise venture capital back in 85. And I don't know how smart that was, but we successfully raised about $5 million in venture, which back in 85 was a lot of money. A little closer. Back in 85 was a lot of money. Got some modicum of success, but towards the end of the decade, automotive industry started to tail off. The company kind of hit a wall. batch metal manufacturers weren't buying equipment and those kind of things. So I went out, started my own outsourced CFO business before internet, before outsourced, before QuickBooks, all that existed. And as the decade wore on, started raising capital for some companies, typically friends and family. And I realized pretty quickly I'm going to run out of friends and family. And most of the time they don't pan out. So you end up with what I like to call roadkill. And that's not good for anybody. Really got very heavily involved in the investment banking area, the outsourced CFO, raising capital for emerging growth companies. Started the Angel Fund back in 2001 with Steve Dubin. I don't know how many of you know Steve, but incredibly bright man. I learned a lot from him with this Angel Fund. We invested in 11 companies, probably screened close to 1,000. So you learn a lot of things if you kind of sit there and pay attention. You learn on the job. You learn, how other people do things. And in theory, you can bring those better ideas to the table, better ideas to the clients, and hopefully to you all tonight. We're also fortunate, too. I don't know if David's in the room here, but a friend of mine is here from San Mateo. He'll be here as well. Runs a venture fund out in California. The rules are a little bit different, despite what some people would say in terms of how they view things. So maybe David will have a few pointers. There's David in the background there. Thanks again, David, for being here. Before we get too far, though, I thought it'd be interesting. How many people here, and maybe a couple different questions, are working with startups or early stage companies? Okay, a fair amount. How many are working emerging growth or more mature companies at this point? Okay, so we'll try to tailor the message a little bit tonight. I think a lot of things we'll talk about really apply whether you're early stage or growth stage in terms of how do you present the company and some of those aspects. But obviously, if you have different questions you want to kind of walk through, want to make sure it's kind of interactive. So I don't know how this has been done totally in the past. Chris and I talked a little bit about this.
Yep. We have a lot of flexibility in terms of how we do that. If you feel, Rick, that you would like to do a little bit more Q&A, there are some things that I do want to cover, yep, and as we go along, but we can feel free to open it up, to the organization's community.
Yeah. So maybe why don't we do that? So anybody has a question, feel free to raise your hand. I've got a couple things I kind of wanted to cover just based on my experiences. And again, I think irrespective of whether you're a startup, early stage, emerging growth, a more mature company, I think some of this applies based on my, unfortunately, decades of experience at this point. One of the things that I've tried to encourage my clients to look at is when I'm sitting down talking to a potential investor, or if I'm talking to a potential buyer of my company, I want them to understand that there's a scorecard that investor or buyer holds up in front of you. It may be transparent, it may be taking notes, but they're sitting there assessing your company when you're having that meeting with them. So I think it's inherently important to understand what they're trying to accomplish so that you can play the chess match 2 or 3 moves ahead and be as knowledgeable as they are in that process. And it really ranges from a litany of different things. I'm trying to assess the risk of your business. How big can the company be? How good is the management team? Do you have customers? Are they paying customers? Do you have market channels that make sense? Do you have market channels that you've already begun to build out? What's been the historical financial performance of the company? And if you can really begin to make sure that you can address those questions, and not everybody and not every company has all those questions answered, but the more boxes you can check, the more likely they're going to have an interest in the company. The more likely the valuation is going to be more attractive because now you're checking off risk boxes. So these are all risk boxes. And I sit there and look at emerging growth companies or startup companies. They've got a great idea, but they don't have a product. Got a great idea, they have a product, but they don't have anybody buying it. Maybe it's freemium, maybe they're giving it away, maybe they're giving it away at a reduced cost. They haven't quite figured out if it's B2B, if it's B2B2C, if it's B2C. They don't have the market channels identified. And those factors, when I'm sitting there as an investor, I'm trying to figure out, okay, how much have they built out? How much do I have to guess at this company, where they might go? And how good is the management team? One of the things that Steve Dubin taught me is that we'd invest in an A management team and a B business plan all day long versus a great business plan and a B management team. Because I don't care what you do, I don't care what business you're in, you're going to run into problems. You're going to run into issues. You're going to run into things that you've got to decide, what do I need to do here? Do I tap the brake? Do I put the gas pedal down? The gauges on my airplane are telling me, altitude and those kind of things. How do I assess those, and how do I change my business plan? So, your role as that management team, as part of that C-suite, is critically important to these investors or buyers, because that's what they're really assessing at this point. And when you're sitting there beginning to look at the process, raising capital or selling your company, you got to put a document together. And that document is critically important. I've watched companies that we looked at on our angel fund. We'd coach them. They'd come out to Cattail Creek. They'd go present. It was like, why did we even bother coaching them? Didn't listen, didn't adjust. We'd sit there, and they're typically 20-minute presentations. The format's different depending on where you go from that standpoint, the type of industry that you're in or where you're presenting. But I'd sit there for 15 minutes, and I heard the story already. I didn't know what they did. I look at it, and I've kind of defined it here. I look at a PowerPoint presentation, and the first thing I want to know is, what's the problem? What problem are you trying to solve? If I sit there and have to listen for 10 minutes and you tell me how it works and I don't know what the problem is, I have a hard time connecting the dots. Almost anybody does. So what's the problem? Then obviously you have to be able to say, how do I solve that problem? So if you can help me understand the issue and then how you solve it, then the synapses start to kick in, and I get that. I never realized there was a problem like that, but understand how you solve it. Want to understand the size of the market. You hear everybody talk about TAM, the total addressable market. Is it a $5 million market? Is it a $50 million market? Is it a $1 billion market? How big is the total addressable market? Because I'm a VC or I'm a strategic buyer, I want to know that I've got ability to buy at X and sell the company at Y. IP is important, but I could tell you, sat there and saw more than my fair share of presentations, and we all get excited about what we do. But at the end of the day, I really don't want to know all the details about the technology, about what it does specifically down to the, to the nth degree. I'll get into that in due diligence, but I really want to understand how it works. But I don't want to be spending 20 minutes of the presentation going through all the ins and outs of that particular technology, whether it's biotech, it's IT, it's cyber. Those things are important, but that's not really what I'm trying to assess at this point. I want to understand the revenue streams, where they're going to come from, what's the price of the product, who's going to buy it, why they're going to buy it, what market channels are you going to pursue. Clearly want to understand competition. Doesn't need to be overly rigorous, but I want you to make sure you can tell me what the landscape looks like. I'll go do my own research. But I don't want to do the research and find a multitude of other competitors you haven't told me about, because that scares me when it's all said and done. What do they do? How do they do it? How do you compete? Where are you better? Where are they better? And being able to assess that. Talked a little bit about the management team. The C-suite doesn't need to be totally built out. In most companies we work with, the C-suite's not totally built out. There's a position or multiple positions that are not filled. If you're raising capital, oftentimes that's why you're raising the capital, is to fill those positions. Want to see the projections. What does that look like? At the end of the day, I've seen more than my fair share of hockey sticks, with the revenue streams, and we all need to be optimistic. If you're not excited about your business, no one else is going to be when it's all said and done. But what do the projections look like? What are the revenues? What are the cost of goods? Is the gross margin going to be comparable to what else you see in your industry? If I've got a company that the gross profit's going to be wildly less than what the rest of the industry is doing, I'm going to be throwing that one in the garbage can when you walk out the door of the presentation. What do you create in terms of profits? What's the team look like? How much money do you need to raise? They're all the things that I want to see in those projections, and I want to make sure that it kind of compares to the other stories that I'm seeing in the marketplace. So I know you had a question?
Yeah. Is it more about the specific numbers, or to see if they actually understand what they're talking about? Because the projections can be written, they can come up with anything.
Yeah.
So it's more to see if they actually know what they're talking about.
Yeah, it's a great question. The question is, is this the specific projections or is it more about the story? And it's more about the story. I mean, I probably have done literally 500 or 1,000 financial models, and what I hate about it, when I'm done, I know they're wrong. They're just wrong. But you try to build the variables in there, and you try to say, okay, this is how I'm going to go out and deploy and execute on this business plan. These are the markets I'm going to go after. These are the revenues. These are the gross profits. The gross profits, as I said earlier, they better map to the industry or be slightly better. The profits, I need to be able to show, ultimately I can make money, at this when it's all said and done. We did 11 companies with our angel fund, and raise a hand, how many guesses do you have that we had to go fund a second or third round on? Any guesses? 11. And had to change out the CEO on a number of them. So my point to that is if you're early stage and even emerging growth, if you go in telling them I'm going to raise this and I'm going to get to profitability, I'm never going to need any money, could be a little bit of skepticism there. And we invested in some pretty good companies. We had one baby organic food company. We broke all the rules. We were trying to invest here locally. It had to be preferred stock. We ran into two women that were building this baby organic food company. They were in New York. It was all common stock, take it or leave it. We invested several $1 million, and they sold 4 years later for $130 million to Danone or Down in Yogurt. Broke all the rules. Just a great management team. We have a couple of other companies that we invested in. We sold one to Nokia, but every one of them needed more money. So it's just go again, you build the projections, you try to decide how much money you need. That the size of the round and your stage of company determines where you probably need to go to look for that money. There's an art to it, but there's a science to it.
Yeah, Rick, could I jump in?
Yep, absolutely.
I go by the rule of twos, and that is give me a business plan, give me a financial model. It's always going to take twice as much and twice as long to reach the goal. What do you think about that?
It's probably conservative. That's the saying for building a house, could take twice as long and twice as much money. Companies probably more than that at the end of the day. I don't know what your experience has been, David, in that regard, but you go to raise capital, and what we try to do is raise enough capital to last 12 to 18 months for the company, because you don't want to be on a perpetual treadmill of trying to raise capital, but you don't want to raise so much that you're getting diluted down and you're raising it when the valuation isn't there. I also try to look at the money that we're raising and say, okay, what am I going to accomplish? What are my investors going to hold me accountable for? So I'm going to get this money today. I'm going to be able to show them these types of activities, these types of actions, these types of improvements in the business that I've accomplished. So when I go to look for my next round of funding, they're the first ones there. Because you go in, and if it's an angel fund, maybe not so much, but you go out to the market and your current investors don't want to invest, it's usually not a really good sign. So trying to strategize, how much money can I raise? What can I accomplish? What's my valuation going to be at that point? Critically important from that perspective.
You mentioned management team a number of times. So what would you say are the top qualities that you're looking for in the management team when you're going in and having that conversation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I may have David chime in on that, and then I'll throw my 2 cents in. David, what would your comment be on that from a management team perspective?
Well, I appreciate that. By the way, I think Rick's doing a phenomenal job in presenting the landscape, and I just come from Silicon Valley, so I've been there 17 years. So the first disclosure is, this is a Silicon Valley thought process, and so perhaps an East Coast, West Coast thing. And I'm just going to start with maybe an analogy that will help frame the conversation. The analogy is the reason I'm here is because my son is at a lacrosse tournament. So we live in Northern California, we live in the Bay Area, and he just spent 3 days at the Baltimore Craft Feast lacrosse tournament and just finished with the Jake Reed Blue Chip showcase. And the reason I say that is coming in, he knew that he had to play by the rules of Baltimore. And in fact, when he was playing the Baltimore Crabs, there was already a bias. They're like, oh my gosh, these kids are from California. This is going to be an easy cakewalk. And so what the California kids, including my kids, had to do was they had to understand the rules of how the Baltimore kids played including raising their level of physicality and how they play. So if you want to raise venture capital, we start with the word if. You have to know the rules of what venture capital cap raise requires. For some companies, you may not need to raise capital. For example, Phil Knight, when he started Nike, he was selling shoes out of the back of his trunk, and he didn't raise venture capital. And not every investor gets it right. So in 2006, some guy came to me and said, my business proposition is 140 characters or less texting. I said, what is your business idea? 140 characters or less texting. Now, back in 2006, we had AIM, AOL Instant Messenger, we had Yahoo Chat and things like that. So I said to him, I said, Biz, what is your business model? He's 140 characters or less texting. I said, oh my gosh. And by the way, that was their third idea. They couldn't get funding for idea number one. They couldn't get funding for idea number two. And their last Hail Mary was this 140 characters or less texting. And I said, I don't see it, didn't invest. And of course, he has the last laugh. That company became Twitter. But he understood the rules of the game. And when he raised that money, he was able to get about 35, initial investors got 35%. Investors don't always get it right. WhatsApp, Jane Kuhn pitched every single VC in Silicon Valley and got turned down by every single one. Only one investor went in and invested in a social media company called WhatsApp. One investor. Sequoia Capital invested in WhatsApp. They were the only investor in WhatsApp, and when Facebook bought it for $19 billion. $60 million invested by Sequoia returned their fund 7x. Because they were the only investor. All the other investors out there. So the reason I share this is the questions that are being asked. If you want to raise venture capital, you have to understand the rules. As my son has to understand, to play lacrosse in Maryland, you have to understand that you need to play by the rules of how Maryland kids play lacrosse. The question of management team in Silicon Valley, we want to see what is it about the founder that would make this particular enterprise a success. So if someone comes and says, I want to start a software company, but the founder has no software background, then we want to see that he's got a co-founder who does in fact have a software background. If someone comes and says they have an enterprise software background and want to start an enterprise software company, then the conversation begins. In Silicon Valley, if you have burned through and have failed multiply, that's actually a great credential, a great resume. Conversely, in Silicon Valley, if you come with an MBA from a notable school like Loyola or Hopkins or Maryland, actually MBAs in Silicon Valley are disdained. MBAs are not welcomed in Silicon, not welcomed as in like not invited to the table, but they don't think that that's a good background to start a company. They rather see kids who are 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 start a company, fail, start a company, fail, start a company, fail, and then come. Imagine in Silicon Valley, we put in billions of dollars in a 19-year-old Harvard dropout, and no one blinked an eye. And now that company's Facebook with 2 billion users. So the management team is critical in the background of what they bring to the table. The second thing is, do they understand what it means to bring an adult to the team if they don't have an adult on the team? Last example is 3 PhD students at Stanford University came up with a new search algorithm. Search engine had already existed. Alta Vista, Terra Lycos, Ask Jeeves, it had already existed. But 3 guys came up with a different way to come up with a search result by popularity of ranking. Now, imagine this is in 1999. So, I mean, search had been out there, but no one ever thought of it doing it that way. But they had no business experience. There were 3 PhD students working in the lab at Stanford University. Stanford University, when Google went public, was the second largest shareholder because at Stanford University, when an idea comes out of its lab, they own the IP. And all the PhD students know this. But when investors started investing in Google, they wanted an adult at the table. And so the company was surrounded by advisors. So if the management team doesn't have a background, needs to have someone either an advisory role or some board level role that can bring some gravitas and expertise to that particular market. And that's something we look for in a management team. Silicon Valley right now is going through a terrible, terrible controversy right now, whereas both investors and CEOs are being outed for questionable behavior. The CEO of Uber has just been fired. A notable VC has been fired for his actions. So now more and more investors in Silicon Valley are doing more and more background checks on their founders, including having FBI checks done. before investing in certain startups. So anyway, again, the rules are a little bit different. Yes, sir.
No question. How do you see that the founder manages the relationship with the VC in terms of you want to show respect and listen to what they're saying, but at the same time you're a founder, so sometimes you know, it's kind of push and take, and you want to respect what they're saying, but sometimes you might be pushing some limits in terms of what you're doing, and they might not be seeing it. So does that each relationship is different, I guess, or?
It's a great question, and just as much as an investor picks an entrepreneur, I always tell the entrepreneur to pick your VC because it can get quickly adversarial. You date, it looks great during dating, even looks great during engagement. Once you get married, now you are tethered to them, and they will have certain expectations, and it becomes quickly adversarial if certain things are not met. So you should, as an entrepreneur, pick an investor just as much as an investor will pick an entrepreneur. And you always want to do a reference check on other entrepreneurs. That, hey, I'm about to raise money from John Doe. You raise money from John Doe. How has he been? Because it will get adversarial when there's a misalignment before it starts met. And because the VCs, what they want to do is get out as quickly as possible with the exit.
Yeah, I want to kind of pick up on the executive. You know, what's the C-suite look like? Great points. We also look for somebody that was coachable, doesn't need to be dominated, but is willing to listen, because you know the business better than anybody. But there are values that can be brought to the table by the right funding sources. Really probably wanted to see somebody that could go out and was more than just about their technology. A lot of times we'd see companies that was all about their technology, not about how you're going to market it, how you're going to make money at it, how you're going to grow this thing, how you're going to sell it. And you can augment the team, as David pointed out, where the holes are. But boy, you can find somebody that knew their business, knew the competitors, and knew how to go out and sell that product. You know, that was something that was impactful to us from that standpoint. We had a couple of, one in particular, we had a medical device company that we invested in hindsight, should have seen all the signs. He knew the technology. Could sit there and talk about it all day long, but had no interest in really trying to figure out how to monetize the idea. And it was a really good idea. Real quick before I forget, because I'm old, if you get a chance, David brought up a good point. I don't know if any of you have ever read the book Shoe Dog. It's a book about Phil Knight. It is a great book. It took me about half a day to read it. I couldn't put it down. I just think how he built his company, how close he was to the precipice of failure with Nike on numerous occasions, out of money. Somebody was kicking him out. He had this shoe called Tiger that he was selling, and he was going to lose the rights to sell it because the shoes were made overseas back in the 70s. Hired somebody to Steve Prefontaine, I think it was, and he has a car accident. That was a big deal back in the 70s. He was a leading track guy. So you ever want to realize how hard it is to build a company? You think Nike just kind of came out of nowhere and hit this pinnacle of success? Read that book. It'll tell you how hard it is to build a company. I'm sorry, did you get a question?
If I could, just a second.
Absolutely.
One thing that in doing some due diligence on Rick, Rick has a very, very interesting philosophy, and by the way, David, thank you so very much for the information. Incredibly valuable. One of the things about young startups is they try, or they think, or they wish, or they dream to go VC real quickly. And they don't learn that there is really a pretty firm path and hierarchy. And that VC funding, 90% of the time, is probably not going to happen, no matter how you cut it. And Rick coined a philosophy that I love, and that is, when VCs aren't knocking, use the duct tape, credit card, and shoestring approach to growing your company. You want to share some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things we talked about in the outline is knowing where your strips of capital are going to come from. So you're a startup, very early stage, especially here on the East Coast. I call it shoestrings, duct tape, and bubble gum. It's hard to go out and find that funding. It's going to be friends and family. It's going to be your own dollars. It could be SBIRs, depending on the industry that you happen to be in. It could be Tedco, which is located right here in Columbia. But there are going to be small strips of capital, 5 figures, 6 figures. If you're lucky, maybe you're able to get to 7 figures. It's your job to use those dollars incredibly valuably and to try to keep the company moving in the right direction. And again, hitting those benchmarks that increase valuation. And if you're fortunate enough to get to that point, now you start looking for angel funding. And I start, suggesting angel funding. You have a little bit of revenue. Maybe it's six figures or get to 7 figures of revenue. You're not going to, typically have much more than that. Angels are probably good for 500 to 2.5 million here on the East Coast. It's probably wildly bigger out where David is. But if you're going out trying to raise $5 million and you got $200,000 of revenue, good luck. It just you gotta tranche it and you have to stage it. I look at the institutional investors here on the East Coast. They want to see $1 million in revenue and they want to write check sizes of $4 million on up. They've got enough capital. Most of them don't want to invest smaller amounts. Now, what I do start to see happening here in the region, it's exciting. Camden just opened up a fund called Excelsius, if I'm saying that correctly. They're putting money into some cyber companies, into biotech, smaller check sizes. I sit on the investment committee for the University System of Maryland. So if it's Maryland IT or it's in a Maryland incubator, it's got a connection to Maryland. They've got a fund that we're starting to put some investment dollars into, 6 figures. So the ecosystem's a little bit more formal today than it was when I was doing my angel fund, get Baltimore Angels and Blue Ventures. But it's chewing gum, duct tape, shoestrings, get something built, get a little bit of revenue, and then I can go to the angel markets. And if I'm fortunate to be able to build from there, and the angels have gotten more sophisticated here in the region in the last decade, and I can get to $1 million of revenue, and I need $4 million, $3 million, $5 million or more in VC, then the VC element starts to come into play. So it's an art, not a science, but there's a lot of science to it. So you can't go out to an angel group and say, hey, I'm trying to raise $5 million because they're just going to shrug their shoulders. Baltimore Angels will invest $200,000 if it's a good deal that most of the team, like Blue Ventures, will invest $500,000. Maryland Venture Fund will invest up to $1.5 million. So you got to really understand, what are my needs, what can I accomplish, and then can I be able to take that story and go out to the marketplace. Patrick, you had a question?
I would get your thoughts on what's happening in our ecosystem from, let's say, from a cyber perspective, because very quietly we're bringing in companies from Northern Virginia. We've got Ricotta, we've got Huntress, we've got Department 13, Silent Circles coming over, all within the last year. It seems to be a push to this area for the young, innovative, companies that are at inflection points. What do you see? Why is it happening?
Well, I think there's a lot of momentum in the cyberspace. How many of you are involved in the cyber area? So a number of you. I think it's exciting what's going on relative to what existed, 5 or 10 years ago. We had the NSA sitting there and Cyber Command and whatnot, but I think Ellen's done a great job building an incubator and infrastructure over at UMBC. I look at the Ron Gulas of the world, and Data Tribe down in Maple Lawn, and folks like that are really putting some interesting things together. Bob Ackerman, Allegis Capital's come in from the West Coast to be looking at some different funding. GrowTech's got a focus with Steve Frederick on the investment side. Blue's got a couple people that they look at from that perspective. You've got some interesting things you're working on as we speak. Again, the Excelsius Fund, they're willing to put some monies in both cyber and biotech. It's an $11 million fund that just formed. So I see a lot of.
It's all coming together.
Yeah.
Sort of critical mass.
It is. I mean, they're ingredients that just didn't exist 5 years ago. And, I always kind of call it the 4 M's of building a great company. You got to have money, you got to have a management team, you got to have mentors, and you got to have market channels. And, to coin a phrase I heard somebody use not long ago, it might have been down at the Tedco Awards, we're trying to help them all collide. Brad's here tonight and wants to jump into the ecosystem and really trying to figure out, what does it all look like? And we've got a U.S. Naval Academy grad, and we want him involved in what's going on here because we need the talent, we need the money, We need to be able to say, okay, how do I go get to a market channel that's going to help me build my company when it's all said and done? So I think those ingredients are all coming into play.
Chris.
Just also to note that Tedco's got $300,000 to help those collisions to happen. So they just released a grant specifically to focus on how do we help our entrepreneur ecosystem work better together. You know, big idea changes too, not like, you know, I don't know, open up another incubator. But big idea changes for the region that can really, you know, excel our ecosystem.
Yeah, just met with Neil Davis last week about that. Yep. So 0 ideas, 1 idea, or 2 ideas is what he told me.
I got a pocket full of them.
Yeah, he said that's all they're going to do. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Yeah, just got a new talented person come in over there at Tedco, George Davis. I was actually fortunate enough to introduce George to John on the golf course a year ago. They didn't know each other, and they had this national recruiter paid them all this money, and we solved it for no money at all. So it's all part of the collision.
All right, we've talked a lot about money. We've talked a lot about venture capital. We've talked about valuations. Let's talk about failure. Let's talk about what the devil happens if it doesn't work out. I'm sure you've experienced failure in your life, professionally and personally. The fears, the anxieties, the worries, depression. Give us some insights. How did you get over that? What did you experience? How did you get over it? Did you have a mentor to help you through? What do you think of mentorship?
A couple questions there. So failure. I've sold this. Patrick's heard this story a few times. When I'm done my career, I'm writing a book. The chapters on the things that I saw in the M&A world and the capital raise world. No one may read it, but it'll be cathartic. It'll lance the wound and get a lot of things out of my system. But it's amazing what you see go wrong. It's everything from, people that don't get along, but it was a great idea. It's people that get, totally immersed in their technology. We had a company 2 years ago. We successfully raised about $3 million. They were focused on brain health. Really smart doctor running it out of Hopkins doctor and a PhD from Harvard, or the other way around. I don't remember. MarTech folks involved. There are things you really can do to improve your brain health. It's more than just what we see on the commercials about, doing mental gymnastics. So we raised $3 million. This thing took off. 4 or 5 locations, a bunch of really, really good people running the company. Felt very confident. One office was located here in Columbia. And then CMS comes in and says, you know what? We don't know what we've been doing, but we reimbursed $750,000 for this image that you're taking of the hippocampus in the back of the brain. And this guy that's working for CMS really doesn't work for CMS. He's a consultant and he's a cardiologist, there's a good friend of mine that could talk about building a company. You ought to come in, Patrick. CMS comes in and says, hey, we're not gonna. That's new science. You're not gonna be able to take this image of the brain. So that's done, and that's about 20% of the revenue. And oh, by the way, you owe us $750,000. And oh, by the way, the company's gone. It just happened out of nowhere. So you got people that you brought in to invest. You got a company that had grown from nominal revenues, maybe $1 million in revenue, to $4 or $5 million in about a year and a half, and the company's gone. So how do you go tell a bunch of investors, hey, it didn't pan out at the end of the day? So, you'll see those kind of failures happen, and it's painful. There's no one to turn to. You got to go talk to the people that you brought in, and I wasn't running the company, but it helped raise the money, and it didn't happen. Apologize, and everybody knew what the risks were, but it's painful. But you move on and you learn never to count on a business model that's relying on the federal government and CMS to reimburse you, because if you do, you got a lot of risk there, and it's a painful lesson, but it is what it is. So, got a gentleman back here, Patrick Mish, built a very successful company. We sold that company a few years ago. I didn't know you were coming in.
Yeah, I was walking by. Rick, great to see you. Sorry to interrupt.
Now building an interesting company, tech transfer out of Hopkins, and I guess you got your presentation tomorrow?
We're pitching MII at Tedco tomorrow morning at 10:15 a.m.
All right. I want to hear good news afterwards. So,
All right. You talked about a company that went out, disappeared. investors lost their shirts. The uncomfortable conversations that inevitably come up, that have to happen. Talk to us about honesty. Seems to me that it's always better to be brutally honest, upfront, good, bad, or indifferent, as opposed to trying to put lipstick on a pig, and the pig's never going to look any better. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, and back to David's point, West Coast is better than the East Coast in this area, but, failures are part of business, and you learn from those mistakes, and we see them all the time. There's a reason that not every company gets funded, and there's a reason that venture capital spreads their money around to multiple opportunities, because they're not all going to be successful. There's going to be some that die. There's going to be the living dead that hang around and don't go away, and then there's going to be some successes in there. Honesty is absolutely critical. I mean, and it's painful. I mean, you sit there, and now fortunately, when we do the capital raise that we do in the angel area, I typically invest, or Evergreen typically invests, so that at least you could sit there and say, we all lost. It wasn't just raising capital and shame it didn't pan out. You have those conversations, and most are good, because most understand the risk, and you've explained that. Others aren't as comfortable, and it keeps you up at night. But fortunately, the days go by, and the weeks go by, and the months go by, and you didn't do anything that was wrong or illegal, so you just move on. But it's hard. You're dealing with employees, you're dealing with clients, you're dealing with market channels, you're dealing with your investors. It's not all going to be a rocket ship to the moon. Patrick knows he built a great company, and there are a lot of more than bumps in the road. There were logs and potholes and craters. Evergreen's been the same way. I mean, I started Evergreen, and there's peaks and valleys, and you get up every day and you muscle through those issues. And back to your point about what are you looking for in a management team, I want somebody that and David kind of touched on it, that's resilient. Not going to not going to sit there and and just walk away and tail between their legs because they heard no. Because you're going to hear no a lot more than you're going to hear yes. I don't know what the statistics are. I'm an LP in Grotex Venture Fund that they just built, $160 million. They'll do maybe 25 deals in that fund, and they'll say no hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times to get to that 25. And some of them never even hear the no. The business plan never gets a response. So you're going to hear a lot of no's when you're building a company, and you just got to muscle through those, and you're going to make mistakes. And again, it's not about making the mistakes, about not making it again. And hopefully they don't put you under when it's all said and done. And that's how you improve, both as an individual and as a company.
Talk to us a little bit about mergers and acquisitions. Granted, this community may be a little young, but opportunities do pop up from time to time. Give us a little detail on, what exactly is mergers and acquisitions? What things should people be looking for? What are the telltale signs that maybe there are opportunities, or there may not be opportunities there?
Well, first of all, mergers, acquisition, obviously selling your business, to state it differently. I don't care what stage you're in, you really got to have that at some presence in your mind as you build your story. And it gets back to the deck. When you're putting the deck together, and I'm an investor, I want to know who you're going to sell to. You're going to build this company. David kind of touched on a little bit. Investor in the VC area, they want a 3x return, at least. 3x return is the minimum. If I'm not going to put my money in, and forget the time value for a moment, if I'm not going to get at least a 3 or 4x return, I'm not interested in investing in your company. So I always try to encourage, when you're trying to raise capital or you're at a point where you could potentially begin to consider selling, again, keeping in mind the investor scorecard. They're going to sit down, they're going to look at your company, and they're going to assess the risk. I just met in New Hampshire with a company the other day talking about the strengths of their company, the weaknesses of their company, what they might be worth today, what can they go focus on to make their company more valuable. The market is really strong right now, but you really need to understand who the buyers might be today for down the road. What are the multiples today? What might the multiples be down the road? And obviously begin to put yourself in a position where you can always be ready to raise capital or sell the company. I sat on the board of a company out here in Glenwood, Maryland, so 20 minutes from here. It was 2 founders and two funders. I was the 5th board member, the only one that they could all feel good about as the odd potential odd vote to make votes 3-2. Host intrusion detection software got incredibly hot, and this is I guess maybe 2005 2006 timeframe. Company had $250,000 in revenue, getting ready to go raise capital. The pre-money was $8 million. Not a lot of takers. Well, the market got hot. Symantec did not have a product. Symantec came in. I guess they were saying, I can make this or I can buy this. They needed a product to go to market ASAP. They bought the company $30 million all cash on $250,000 in revenue. So every once in a while, you'll get a flyer. We call it a spike bid, a flyer. You pick whatever phrase or words you want to use, but you'll see companies that get into a unique space and unique opportunities, and Twitter's worth whatever it's worth today relative to its revenue. You can't even do the valuation and the multiples on that. So I always like to encourage our clients when we're raising capital, understand who the buyers might be, understand that it could come out of nowhere. Try to have your company prepped to some extent to be ready to do that. And obviously, as you mature, that becomes more and more of an apparent opportunity, and there are things that you can do to make sure you've checked boxes to increase the value of your company. And it's everything from customer diversification to really clean books to non-solicit non-competes for your employees to those types of things that are critical when you start looking at it from a valuation standpoint. Patrick, we worked together on a company 2 years. It took us 2 years to get this company sold, and it was a really good company. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. It was a project. I mean, 2 years. Financials weren't great. Management team, was difficult to work with at times, but ended up being a very successful sale for the founders and the owners, and it was a very nice exit from a size perspective.
Well, to give Rick some credit, so the projected valuation increased by almost 75%. While they cleaned things up. So it was, the work that they did to make things right based upon Rick's guidance paid tremendous dividends for all.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Rick? Yeah, Jeff.
You alluded to it earlier, but at what point in time does culture become a very, very, very important thing when you're looking at either the second round of investment or as you deal with these companies or even before you invest?
Culture as it relates to dealing with your investor, or culture as it relates to
The corporate culture of your target company, so to speak, or your invested in company.
Yeah, I think I'll tell you, culture is incredibly important. You can't always see it. Matter of fact, you can't see it, but you can feel it. I've done some work with companies. There's a company here locally, Harkins Builders. We're in the construction space, 100% ESOP now, partial ESOP. We put the ESOP in place way back under Blaze Cook. Blaze was a legend in my mind. You could walk in, and I'd proffer to you that culture was palpable. I don't know that investors or even buyers spend as much time in that area as they probably should, partly because it's just hard to assess. It's hard to get a feel for it. Yeah, absolutely is. I mean, if I'm reading a book right now, read some other things, a Lencioni book about trying to hire the right people, and to me, it's kind of distills down to hungry, humble, and smart. Those people don't fit those criteria. We're not hiring them. And I'm not talking about being smart in what you do. I'm talking about people smart. You really can understand people and be able to respond, whether it's internal or external. So when I look at culture, for my business, that's how we distinguish. And I go back and look at the people that we failed on the hire side. At least one of those areas, it was a flat tire. You're not going to be perfect in all those areas, but culture is important, and it's a hard thing to create. It's a hard thing to keep moving in the right direction.
My assumption is the CEOs you've replaced have hurt that culture. That would be my guess.
Yeah, it was back to David's point. It was partly one deal going in, a company called Allpoint. I don't know if you've ever seen the ATMs. There's surcharge-free ATM networks in this country. Hard to say, and haven't been drinking either. But neat company. But we were going to put our money in. we weren't going to ride the bus with the CEO that was in there. The CEO moved into a different role, and he was good with that. That was a very successful company that we sold to a publicly traded company called Cardtronics in Houston, Texas, a bunch of years back, and it's still around. I'll go around once in a while, look at the ATM, and still see the Allpoint logo, and that's pretty cool. But having a management team that's willing to work together. Back to your question, a management team that's saying, "Hey, I'm really a CTO. I'm not a CEO. I need to step aside. I'm a CMO or whatever it is." That's critically important, and driving that back through the organization is important. I would say, candidly, I think it's a harder thing to assess. Investors are seeing dozens and hundreds of deals and coming in and looking at that. Some are probably, I'm sure, better at it than others. When we're trying to look at a client relationship that we have, we're trying to value judge that. Is this someone that we can work with? Is this something that's going to be fun? And I mean that truly. I mean, we sit there today. We need to make money. We want to finish with a great reputation. We want to enjoy the experience, and we want to enjoy the people that we work with. Because we're not going to enjoy it, it's not worth pursuing at the end of the day. So I don't know how that all fits into culture, but it's a great question, and it's something, if you're building a company, it's critically important to focus on.
Okay. We have time for one more question. Anybody?
On an M&A side, what do you think are the keys to success of the integration of the company that's been bought and being integrated to the other company? What's that, or keys to failure?
Yeah, it's a great question. You could probably reverse engineer it. If I'm looking to sell, how am I going to, other than just grabbing my paycheck at the end of the day, how am I going to look at it as a success? And we're actually working on a couple buy sides right now, and the integration is critical. As I like to say, it's easy to put them together. It's hard to make them work. It's not easy to put them together. We could do another whole night on that one. Some great stories there. Back to my book, which will be out in maybe 5 or 10 years. But the integration, it's hard. Culture's critical. If I'm really trying to build a great organization, culture is going to be critical. And there's so many companies that mess that up. It's not even funny. I want to make the acquisition. I want to get my revenues. I want to get my profits up. I'm looking to sell. I would, the old phrase "roll up." People don't use that phrase much anymore because it has such a bad connotation. But that's largely what they view it. So it's culture. Clearly, the information systems are critical. The reaching out and being able to touch the customer the way they're used to being handled. I always call it the user experience. We're always trying to drive the user experience at Evergreen. What's the user experience internally or externally? If you can't keep the people, if you can't make the customers as happy or happier than they already are, you can't get the product out the door, whatever that is, whether it's a product or service, you're going to have a hard time making that work when it's all said and done. This one assimilation document or integration document that we have 64 pages. So it's a long topic, but it's everything from benefits to people to IT to how do you handle customers, where do you buy your product. I mean, it's a complicated process, and most don't like to spend the time working on it.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have to move on. I would like to thank you, Rick, very, very much.
Yeah, thank you.
For your time and your insights. And I have a couple of small tokens of the community's appreciation. And I hope that you'll be able to stay around for a little while, because I'm sure people are going to want to talk to you some more. Are you able to? Okay. David, will you be able to stay around for a while?
If I could, on some of the questions that were being asked here, I think, again, from Silicon Valley, good companies will get funded. Companies don't have to be in Silicon Valley to get funded. And in fact, I was hoping Millennial Media's success would have been a catalyst for more successes out of Baltimore. I'm actually a Loyola Blakefield grad. And so I have a real soft spot. And when Paul Palmieri started Millennial Media, that's an example of a person whose background and resume lend itself to make Millennial Media do well. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing, again, going back to the lacrosse analogy, in Silicon Valley, we have a built-in ecosystem that makes things hum. Silicon Valley as a place, as a thought process, has only been around 48 years. And the reason it's called Silicon Valley was because of Fairchild Semiconductor, a silicon chip company. And when I look at why the best lacrosse in America is in Maryland, is because kids are born with a lacrosse stick in their crib. And every other house has a lacrosse goal in their backyard. And the number of legendary high school players, high schools, and high school coaches, it just feeds itself. And I think that is sort of an allegory to how this community could really become a tech hub when you have all the outstanding people that are here and for people who've been successful to give back. I think on the culture piece, boy, we are really drawing a red mark in Silicon Valley today. It is actually embarrassing to be in Silicon Valley today. It is actually embarrassing to be known as an investor, to be lumped in that category now. So we got a lot of work to do. In terms of that culture, what we look for in as an investor is, does the CEO actually understand culture? And so one of the things we suggest is, what is the purpose of your company beyond the solution, beyond the product? And it goes into things like, okay, do you have an exit plan? What is your exit plan and why? Philosophically, do you want this to be a lifelong company, or do you want to sell or go public? And do you know what it means to hire well? Do you have a purpose mission statement? And do you want to be recognized for creating a solution? What is the culture of your company? So we recommend this book that Jack Welch wrote a long time ago, the former CEO of GE. The first 20 hires, according to Jack Welch, the first 20 hires of your company will set the culture for the rest of your life. You could become a 100-person company, 500-person company, 1,000-person company, 10,000-person company, but if you don't get culture right with your first 20 employees, you're not getting the genie back in the bottle. Hewlett-Packard, when they first started Hewlett-Packard, they vowed never to take external debt. Can you imagine a company with that mission statement, purpose statement? Hewlett-Packard, never to take external debt. Well, after they retired and after they sort of passed on the mantle, Hewlett-Packard's management started taking on a lot of debt. And the company has forever been different. So the HP way doesn't have the same meaning as it once did. Steve Jobs was legendary. No product was shipped without his final approval. You could say that's micromanagement, but every single thing, starting with the iPod, there's no way that Sony Digital should have lost the music digital resolution to Apple, but the iPod would not leave Apple without his final sign-off. And even the iPhones would not leave without his final sign-off. That's the company culture that he created. On the M&A stuff, for those of you who are thinking M&A, you are in the best period of corporate history existence. There's so much capital in companies. Business 101 is either buy, build, or let a company die and pick it up on the cheap. And Silicon Valley is legendary for picking up companies. They don't buy well. Facebook bought Oculus and had to write it down. But Facebook also bought Instagram for $1 billion, which is now, as a standalone, worth about $60 billion. So if you're thinking M&A, this is the best time to be, because there is excess amount of capital that's available for M&A. Lastly, right now the IPO market is somewhat tepid. It takes about 9 to 10 years for a venture-funded company to go public. So an exit through an M&A process is a quicker return for investors, and investors actually are looking for M&A as an exit. But remember who you're going to sell to, because there are better buyers than others. Cisco a few years ago decided to go into the consumer product business. They had no business being in the consumer product business. They bought a camcorder company called The Flip, and 12 months later, and they shut it down because they wanted to go into consumer business, but they've always been an enterprise company. So there are better buyers than others, and so when you're thinking or being approached, work with your advisors, work with your bankers, and making sure that you are buying or selling to a buyer that perhaps shares your vision and product, because there are better buyers than others. But thanks. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, hey, everybody. We're really pleased to be here. Really flattered that we'd be considered for something like this. This all started not long ago. I was managing a property full of Hopkins students, which are incredibly intelligent, also not as connective and social as you might figure. And there was a school down the street from the building, brand new, that was characterized by underserved students. So I thought that it might be a great idea to take Hopkins students and tutor them. Easy, right? Like, incredibly easy. We'll just walk down the street and do this. And when we met with the principal, she says, save us. Our math programs are suffering, right? So immediately I thought of Josh. Josh and I have been friends before, but we said, let's work on this together. Let's figure this out. And before we knew it, we had developed the math program. And before we knew it, after that, we realized we had failed. Bad program. We hadn't changed the paradigm of math programs. So we sat down and we looked at, where does math go? Why? Why do we need this? Right? And we started to look at problems inside of our structure here in the States, systemic problems with debt, with particular money aspects, and an approach to things that we could possibly address. So we changed everything. We're both sports coaches, and we decided to go into what is now Ortis Academy, where we are an experiential learning company with a focus on financial literacy. And I think both of us probably hate the term financial literacy, because literacy is not the issue. We don't want students to define money. We want them to make better decisions with money. So we've got an entirely different approach. Josh is going to tell you what we've done so far.
So far we've been in business for about 2 years. We got our nonprofit status about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and then we decided to kind of, through the process of failure and development. I'm going to move over here because that is annoying. We've been putting our action plan into action for this past year. So at the beginning of the school year for 2016, we decided that we wanted to reach about 200 students, and we wanted to hit a public school, a private school, and a special needs school. And I'm very happy to say that in this past school year, we hit close to 300 students, 9 programs. We're getting ready to have our 10th program on Wednesday. We absolutely hit private school, we hit public school, we hit a special needs school, the Baltimore Lab School, down in Baltimore City. And then we've done a variety of other out-of-school programs like summer camps, community programs, churches, stuff like that. Another stat that I guess I'm very proud of is that we've had about 85, I think, 100 volunteers from local universities. Loyola, just for the record, being our #1 provider of students from the marketing department, entrepreneurship department, the MBA program. They come out and interact with the kids and walk them through the game, which now Aaron is going to tell you all about.
So those are our numbers. I see why you moved. Those are our numbers, but I don't think our numbers really talk about why and what we do. We offer 2 programs. One is called Money Club. The second is called Numis Plus. These are after-school programs, and we like to think that there's an engagement strategy that we employ that others don't. So all of our programs start with a game. As sports coaches, it's very easy to associate learning with gaming. And kids nowadays are learning in very different ways, right? Like when I went to school, we sat down and just learned. And as you can see, I can't stop moving. Like it's just part of how I am and who I am. So we designed this game to simulate what real life is. So students come in, we sit them down, we talk the rules of the game over in about 10 minutes. Try to get them started quickly. The first station that they visit in a room of tables is the employer. So they have to do something physical for their salary that we assign to them. The next station they visit is the bank, where they deposit and withdraw paper money that they've earned at the employer. The next station is a Mr. and Mrs. Fun. So they have a big carnival spin wheel. They spin the wheel, it lands on yellow, and they draw a card from a yellow deck. And there's a bunch of different colors, and something happens. So they could crash their car, get Amazon Prime, write a book. Mama's in the hospital, got to take off work. Buy a watch, be the best man, buy your girlfriend a purse, right? All these things. We basically just sat down and wrote everything that happened to us in like a 3-year span. And you'd be surprised how wide that spectrum was. After that, so at that table, it's a pay or earn, right? So those costs are incurred. They have to pay in full. If they don't, they take on debt, and they add a fee on top. And they have to track this on the sheet that we give them. Next station is the landlord. So we assign them rent to start. That can eventually be modified. Afterwards, they go to the landlord, the bill collector, and pay their year worth of bills. The final table in the circle is the investment manager, where they can buy. Yes. So in the circle is investment manager, where they can buy an education, or they can buy a property. And we have a variance of properties. And in the center of the room, we put the lottery table. And that dynamic, that circle, represents 1 year. And we try to play it through about 5 or 6 years. And what's fascinating is that when we start this game, we never say, We never say a term, never say a definition, never say anything except we're not here to teach you. Go play. Winner gets cash. So all of a sudden you see middle school kids, our primary market, light up. Because cash is awesome, right? Like I'm assuming you guys like money, yes? Pretty safe assumption. So what we find are these great aha moments where a student can walk in, play our game, get to the first station where he has to pay something. And he'll say, I don't have enough money. What do I do? And then he'll just get blasted and blasted and blasted. And by the time he's done, he'll get back to the bank after earning his second year of salary, and he'll sit there and he'll calculate. And without us even teaching, he's just budgeted. So,
Okay. Let me ask a couple of questions.
fire away.
Okay. So your business model then is you've got two games
Two
that
programs.
are two programs that are complementary, right?
Yes.
Okay. Tell us your business model.
Want to take
How,
this?
where are you and how are you going to make money?
Good question. So our programs are sold to schools. So as of now, we are going school to school. We're about a year into operation. So they're sold to schools. Money Club is about $3,000. Numis Plus is about $950. The programs are sold to schools directly. The program length varies. Those are two separate programs in which we are paid half up front, half at the end. The structure of the business is really simple. Our costs are fairly low, so each program, I'd say our margin is about 50%. We run, each game is sort of supplied as far as human capital goes by volunteers from local colleges, which is a big mover and shaker for us. And our real labor force comes from college interns that are still active in college looking for the resume builder to get them where they want to go.
Okay. So we have a sense of your business model. Where are you? What are you struggling with? What's the problem that you would like our help with?
So as Aaron said, one of our biggest struggles, and I think unique selling propositions, is the human capital, is our connections with the colleges, is our ability to get our volunteers to not only come out and try it once, but to come out again, right? 80% of our volunteers come back twice or more. That's a huge number for us. So one of the big issues is how do we scale it up, right? There was a gentleman that was here a little while ago from Philadelphia, right? We were chatting with him earlier. If he were to ask us to come to Philadelphia and run our program up there, how do we do that, right? Our network is here. The college and connections to students is here. So how do we kind of continue to grow and do that without running ourselves thin and having to find 10 or 12 volunteers for every single game?
Okay, so the problem is you've tested the market, you've at least got initial validation of the market, you are generating revenue, although not much, right? And now you want to expand and you want to scale, but you are human capital intensive.
Absolutely.
What options have you thought of and what options have you considered?
So the big one, and I think the obvious one, is going virtual, building a game platform that students could play online or that we could sell licenses to. But one of the things is that we kind of wanted to initially avoid was there's something tactile about earning $40,000 and then handing somebody $20,000, right? That you can't learn from just watching numbers tick down or up on a screen. Right, so how do you convey that message and teach those lessons when it's just ones and zeros, right? So that's what we're trying to combat, knowing that the logical answer to that question is build a game, do it virtual, put it online, right? We live in that world. The kids know and interact with their phones more than they interact with each other, right? I can promise you that.
You're right. The problem is those same kids in the real world have no idea how to make changes with dollars. You know, you hand somebody a $20 bill, they have to read the answer every single time. And they can't just sit there and go, $7.82, here you go.
I also believe that one of the things that's missing here is the interaction of going through the game that has been taken out of whatever elementary school is, and they are just self-absorbed with a machine. I think that's
That's what you're selling.
that's what you're really selling is that interaction.
Experience.
Yeah. So that human experience has got to have some kind of human capital built behind it.
I think one of your potential answers, or some of the potential answers, are to back up and look at who are all of the stakeholders in the success of this. Parents. I've had a client for 25 years who's beaten his head raw. He's a former deputy superintendent of instruction down public schools. He no longer tries to sell things to school systems. School systems don't buy anything that makes any sense that's being developed. But who are the stakeholders? Charter schools? The charter schools would probably be way open to this. Parents in communities where parents are involved with their children, and maybe the private schools are going. The private school is going to give you more input on that. I mean, but I tell you, there are 5 or 6, 8 charter schools in Baltimore City where the parents are just as involved as the parents at Gilman and Bryn Mawr and everything else.
Homeschool.
And the homeschool, oh my God! You know anything about the homeschool infrastructure?
Some, yes.
Oh my God, I mean, it's thousands of people in the state of Maryland alone who meet every week, who meet quarterly in groups. So they're all stakeholders in this. Now, technology can help you. You ever heard of anybody having an internal wiki?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
We have
if you have an internal wiki, if you have a way for people who want to launch this program, and you guys aren't going all over the country doing it yourself, then wrap it with a operating mechanism that enables people with more than a half a pound of intelligence to learn how to do it, and then you can build a community where they start sending stuff back and forth. Matter of fact, I'm going to connect you with Nick Kohr. I mean, he's somebody good.
Thank you.
Yeah, one of the things, I don't know, I'm always a big believer if you can push one domino down and it knocks down a whole bunch, that's a great channel. I agree with the comment about the education system and trying to sell. There's a lot of, roadkill, as I like to call it. Companies try to do that. Have you looked into companies that are focusing on financial literacy like Everfi and talked to folks like that?
Potentially. What we've tried to avoid is vested interest in things that we don't align with, right? And being very truthful about financial literacy from a top-down perspective. And we don't necessarily want to sell out to affiliate marketing for the interests of our kids, right? So if we're partnering with a company like that, our fear is that suddenly we're channeling kids to a certain advisor rather than the overarching themes that come with understanding money. That would be one. But there are some education companies that blanket. There are sort of aside from education, but are hitting remedial kids or addressing similar issues that may not be financial literacy that we can be modular into. So we have looked at those channels where we can get into one and funnel into 5. Bell Leadership is one, so it's a leadership program. They're massive, they're nationwide, and we can get into them and then go wide from there. We've thought about licensing, so we commoditize it more or less, and we license it out. Oh yeah.
I know you just said you don't want to channel this to a partner, but what struck me out of that conversation is, what about a bank? What if you sat there and said, we're going to run this on Saturday morning at, M&T or Bank of America or SunTrust or any of those other places that have a vested interest in those same kids learning how to use bank?
An avenue we've explored, and as we are gathering steam, I think we will continue to revisit and apply for support and grant money and things like that. As a nonprofit, we can do that. But it's that mechanism is still a fear of ours, that we would have to make sure that partnership is correct. There are just some banking structures that a bank is going to promote that might not be in the best interest of a student to learn. So
Put those rules in for that bank
Yes, and that's the fit, right? Find the right bank for that.
Gentleman back here.
Yeah, so your challenge, scaling your human capital or your sales? I mean, so it sounded like at the beginning you were more concerned that if you got sales, you could scale the capital. Which one are you most concerned with?
Scale sales,
Scale sales.
but
okay.
it's reliant on human capital.
What's the motivation for your human capital now? Why does somebody come and volunteer?
That's a great question, and probably the culture that Rick spoke about earlier, right? As we go into a school, we can supplant a really engaging community aspect to this, where when we're running a program, it's 17 individuals from colleges, from local businesses that are now interacting with the kids that create that special sauce where we're now creating human interaction that's so quickly being eroded from our system, especially around a topic like money, right? Money is exchanged. It's not often just transferred. So we find that there's so much more stickiness to the education because of that. Oh my gosh, I have to do this right here. I have to explain this right now. I have to write my story down, and I have to be accountable to what I'm doing rather than someone that they know. It's much more.
But what's the motivation for your volunteers? Like why are they doing it, and what do they get out of it? Because if that's what you need to scale, I think really getting to the core of that can help you explore how to scale that component to it. Because it seems like you have two customers, right? You have three major stakeholders, but two customers that really have to buy your product first. Kids have to be there regardless.
Right.
But you have customers who are going to purchase you, and the customers who are supplying the human capital to do it. So you almost really have to have a roadmap for both, or really articulate both, and maybe even applying some of what you do really well on one side to the other. Like, can you gamify volunteering in some way? Because that then creates something that you can scale and build upon.
Mm-hmm.
So just, that's how I see two areas. Sounds like you have one really well down, but maybe the more you can think about that and frame that out.
So I'll tell you what we've done so far, and I think that's a really good clarification because we're also looking for how to amplify that. Currently, we go into college clubs, accounting club, econ club, investment groups, entrepreneurship, education, and advocate for them to get involved to benefit their resume, to get involved so that they have a story when they go to a job interview, things like that. But I do think we need to find a quicker way to do that, because that's us going in and pitching what we do to a group of 18, which is a decent number, but we need to get that wheel to turn a little faster.
Going related to that, and how you're trying to expand this, what is your sense of calling in this? I have a sense that you're really passionate about it, and it's not just selling a business. So why are you doing this, and what do you want to see happen with this? I mean, if you could just articulate from a personal perspective.
Sure. You want to do yours first?
Sure. Under the bus I go. So for me, I'm an educator, right? I came from a history of, I ran a martial arts school, and for the reason that I stopped doing that was it was really unfulfilling to spend my days teaching kids a skill that I hoped they never had to use, right? Like, as a teacher, as an educator, I wanted them to learn skills that they could put into action every single day. And so money became that, right? And I think that part of that was I hated math when I was in school. I'm a teacher over at Howard Community College. I teach entrepreneurship, and I remember my first week, I was in a co-meeting with the math department, and they asked the kids, they were like, raise your hand if you hate math. And I think my hand went up faster than the kids did. And I realized that that was an issue, right? That it's not math that I hate, it's that I needed some way to apply that math that was engaging and interesting. And so for me, I get my fulfillment out of doing the education component, interacting with the kids, seeing that spark of a kid coming in and saying, I never knew that education could be as valuable as it is, right? I'm going to not play the lottery, and I'm going to save my money in order to go to college in the game, right? Because they see that happen. Or I hear the kids say, like, I'm not going to play the lottery. It's a waste of money. Nobody wins, right? If that's all that they get from playing our game and they walk away with just that, that's a success for me, right? And of course, right, the financial and the right, all of that as well.
Trying to multiply that passion through the game for others to do this and expand this throughout the United States. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely.
So I think you have a tribe out there, it's my guess. And the question is how do you get, I come from a profession that's done really well selling to themselves, which is the coaching profession. You got it? Yeah. Which is the coaching profession. And a lot of people are making the most money in the coaching profession are certifying other coaches. And they love doing it, right? So I think my thought is you have a tribe out there that's ready to learn and teach what you do. You got to figure out a model for expanding that in other communities. Internet marketing is a great stream of doing that if you haven't already explored that. You get out there and talk about what your passion is and find people that want to come and get paid to get certified to do the game. So that's just about that.
Okay, I unfortunately have to stop the Q&A, but Josh and Aaron will be around after we close for any additional thoughts, comments, and connections, maybe to help them move forward. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the program tonight. I do have a couple of announcements.